If you wanna start making games, you've reached the correct place. Today, you will be learning how to make this very basic game in which the player can move using the keyboard and also has to collect some objects. This game may seem very simple, but by creating it you will learn a lot. If you have zero experience in game development or know the basic stuff, this tutorial is perfect for you. I will explain every single thing I do in detail so that everything is understood perfectly. Are you ready to start creating amazing games? So firstly, you're going to need to have a Unity Hub download. So download right now Unity Hub from its official site. And also you're going to need some kind of code editor. I recommend you Visual Studio Code or also Visual Studio. Maybe Visual Studio Code is a very good program if you are starting to make games, because the installation progress of Visual Studio Code is very simple. Once you have Unity Hub installed, I believe you're going to have to sign in an account, and after that you will also need to install some version of Unity. So you will have to go to the install section, then click here where it says install editor, and here I recommend you to download the recommended version. So you would just click here where it says install, and then you will wait just a couple of minutes. Then you will go to the project section and you're going to create a new project. So here you can put a project name, for example tutorial. You also have here the location where you wanna save your project, and you can select a template. In this case we are going to make a very simple 2D game, so I'm going to select 2D, and finally you will click create project. Creating a project in Unity may take above a minute, but this time will all depend on your device. So I will quickly explain the Unity interface because it's very simple. On the left hand we have the hierarchy window. This window is basically where all of our game objects will be stored. We also have the project window where we will see all of our files of our project. We can also have the console where we can send some messages, and if we have some error it will also be shown here. We also have here the scene view where we will see all of our game objects and our scene. And finally we have here the inspector in which we can modify some properties of our game objects. If you can see some of these windows, you can go to here in the top part window, and here you have a lot of windows you can start showing. We also have the game window where, for example, if we play our game, here we will see the actual game. In order to connect our Visual Studio Code or our Visual Studio or any other code editor you have, you're going to go to edit, then to preferences. I'm going to make this thing bigger, and here you are going to look for external tools, and here in external script editor you are going to select the one you have installed, in my case Visual Studio Code. So now let's start actually making this game. Firstly, we are going to need a resolution for our game. As you can see here we can select our resolution. In this case it's 3 aspect, but we're going to select this aspect that, let's say, is the most used one. And I'm going to create our first game object. In order to do this, I'm going to right click in the hierarchy window to the object, because this is a 2D environment, sprite, and I'm just going to create a square. Also I can name it here. This is going to be our player. And well, here we have our player that it's just a square. In the inspector window we can see the different components this game object has. For example, we have here the transform, which stores the position, rotation and scale. As you can see, the position here is 1 and here is 0.6. So in order to change it, for example, we are going to change it to 0, 0, which would be the exact center of the window. We also have the rotation. For example, here we can change the X rotation, but as you can see, this is what it does. But the most used type of rotation in 2D is the Z rotation, as you can see. And we also have the scale, which basically scales our game object. Here we also have the sprite renderer, which in this case the sprite is just a square, as we talked about earlier, and we also have here the color. Now if we play the game, we can see that actually nothing happens. We only have this player in our screen. So let's actually create our first script. In order to do this, inside our assets folder, we are going to create a new folder by right clicking create folder, and I'm going to name it, for example, script. If you don't know what a script is basically a file in which we are going to write our code. And usually in a game you have a lot of script with different uses. So in this case we are going to again right click create C# script, and we are going to create a new script name, for example, player movement, because this script is going to handle our player movement system. Then we are going to select our player game object, and here we can either drag and drop it inside our player game object, or also we can click here where it says add component, and here we can just write player movement and we will have our script attached. Then when we double click inside here, our code editor will be opened. In the top part of the script we have these namespaces. Here we have the class name, which should always be the same as the script name. And also here I believe you are going to have some methods, for example void start, and you will also have void update. Okay, and I'm going to explain this thing right now. And also here you're going to have some comments. If you want to put a comment in C#, you put 2 slashes, I think they are called, and you can put any comment. So a comment is basically some line of code that literally does nothing. It's just to see, to write something important about our code. So in this case I'm just going to delete it. Firstly, the start method is called as soon as we start playing. So for example, if here we tell the code to print something, to print is basically log a message to the Unity console. We can, for example, print a start method called, for example, and then here in Unity, if we start playing, here in the console you will have our message. Whereas if, for example, we move this instruction to the update method, the update is called at every time, at every frame. So if we then come back to Unity and we play, we are going to see our message printed a lot of times. You can see here, but okay, for now I'm going to delete this thing. So the first thing we are going to write in our script, we are going to need a variable which will store our speed value. A variable is basically a value that is stored while the game is played, and as this is a variable, its value can be changed. So in this case I'm going to call private. Then we are going to need the type of variable. It can be an integer, a float, a boolean, which is true or false, a string. There are lots of type of variables. In this case I'm going to create a float. Then we will need our variable name, for example speed, and then we are going to assign our variable to, for example, 5. If a variable is private or a function is private or public, will determine if that variable or function will be accessed or can be accessed in other class or script. In this case, we don't want our variable speed to be modified in other script, so that's the reason why I only call it private. Another thing we need is our rigid body. I'm going to explain what a rigid body is in a second. Basically, if we add a rigid body to our player, check that you add a rigid body 2D and not a rigid body like the normal one, because the rigid body is for 3D environment and we are using a 2D environment, so rigid body 2D. And now if we play, you're going to see that the player falls down. This is because rigid body are used to physical behaviors. For example, you have here the gravity scale, which by default is set to 1, but if we set it to -1, you're going to see that the player goes up. In this case, we want no gravity, so I'm just going to set it to 0. Inside the information of the rigid body, you can see here a parameter called velocity, and by this script we want to modify this parameter of velocity. That's why in our script we need to access this rigid body 2D. In order to assign this variable or to get rigid body 2D, there are two ways of doing this. The first one is by script, so in this case we make the variable just private, and in the inside the start method, which you should now know that this start method is called as soon as the game starts, we can assign our rigid body to get component rigid body 2D. Okay, this is the first way of doing this, but other way that you will write no code in order to assign it is to actually serialize our variable. Okay, so by doing this, if we come back to Unity, you will see here a field which is named RV, and we can just drag and drop the reference we want to assign. Just going to here in the code, move this variable up. Now we are going to create our update method. Another important thing you should know is that when you are creating a function, you have to also determine if this is going to be private or public. And here, this is the type of data this function will return. In this case, our update method isn't going to return anything. That's why we use the keyword void. But for example, if here we will put return true, for example, here we should also put bool, because a boolean is a true or false statement, and here, as it would return a true statement, we should put here bool. I know this is maybe confusing, so let's just not pay too much attention to that. Here in the update, I'm going to create two variables. So here will be float. I'm going to name it movex, and this is going to be equal to input dot get axis row, and here I'm going to write horizontal. Okay, which this line is basically doing is assigning to this variable this value. This value input dot get axis row horizontal returns that if we are pressing the letter A, it's going to return -1, whereas if we press D, it's going to return 1. We can also print this value in the console so that you can see it clearly. So here I am pressing nothing in the keyboard. That's the reason why 0 is being printed. But if I press D, for example, you can see here at the bottom 1. Or if I press A, you can see here -1. Again, if I release 0, D, 1. The same thing is going to happen if we make another variable and call it move Y, and I assign to this input.getAxis row vertical. Okay, the vertical axis will mean that if I press W, the value returned will be 1, and if I press S, the value returned will be -1. At the top of our script, we are also going to create another variable. This is going to be a vector2 variable, and I'm going to call it move input. Then in our update method, I'm going to assign this move input to a new vector2, which basically a vector2 takes two parameters, an x and a y value, and here we are going to assign our move x and move y variables. We are going to use this move input variable in order to actually move the player around. If you still can't understand what move input does, let's just print it in the console. As you can see, when I start playing, this is 0 and 0. The first value is x and the second value is y. It means move x and move y. If I press just the D, you can see here 1. This is move x. If I press A, this is going to be -1, W1 but in the Y, and if I press S, -1 if I press this. But then for example, if I press W and D, you can see 1 1 because I'm pressing D and W. But if I press for example A and S, you are going to see another value. If I press this other two, another value, if this other two, other value, and you can be here trying out new values. So I'm just going to delete this print statement, and I'm going to call here another function that is called the fixed update function. This fixed update function is usually used to manipulate rigid body's position and velocity. So we are going to call RV, and this RV, this rigid body, has inside a function which is called move position. This move position requires some parameters. In this case, we are going to put here RV.position, which means our current position, plus our move input, which I have just showed you what this move input is. And we are also going to multiply this value by our speed, because as we've seen in the console, this value is only 1 or -1, but this value is too low that the player wouldn't move a lot. So that's the reason why we multiply this value by speed, and in this case is 5. And finally, we will multiply this value by time.fixed delta time. Well, delta is a bit complex to explain in just one video, but it's mostly used to make this statement to work exactly the same in another device. Because if we have, for example, a PC that is running 30 FPS and another that is running this other amount of FPS, if we wouldn't multiply this value by time.fixed delta time, these two PCs would run the game differently. If you're interested in learning more about delta time, I recommend you to research more because it's a little bit complex, even more if you are starting. So now, by pressing W, A, S, D, or even the key arrows, we can just move our player around. But here we have a problem. If we move in 4 ways, nothing weird seems to happen. But if I move diagonally, as you can see, the player speed is increased. So in order to fix that, we have to normalize this vector. And by normalizing this move input vector, you can see that now the movement system works perfectly fine. Now that we have some basics of the Unity engine and the C# programming language, we can go now to program our collectible objects. In order to do this, we are going to need to create some other object. In this case, again, to the object sprite, and here we have a lot of shapes you can choose. Previously, we had created a square, so for example, as this is going to be like a coin, I'm going to create it a circle and I'm going to name it coin. Also, you can make it smaller, either by here in this vector, you can reduce, for example, this to 0.5 and 0.5, or also you can hold shift and drag this thing and you can just scale it. So I'm just going to make this thing smaller, for example, to this value I believe is okay. And also here in the color, this is a coin again, I'm going to make it yellow. Now if we play the game, we are going to see that if we touch the coin, nothing seems to happen. This is because none of them have a collision detector. In order to add this collision, firstly in the player we are going to add a component which is named Box Collider. With this button here, we can edit the collider. In this case, as you can see, it's perfect. It always matches the sprite size, so it's correct. But for example, if you would like to, you could modify the box collider, so the collider would be bigger and more collisions would be detected. we are going to make a similar thing in the coin. We are going to add another component, but in this case, as this is a circle, if we for example here assign a box collider and we edit this collider in order to see it, we can see that here in these parts, for example in these 4 parts of the circle, collisions will be detected, but actually they shouldn't be colliding here, of course. So in order to match the collision properly, you can add a circle collider 2D, but also I would like to show you that if you search here collider 2D, remember to always add 2D components, you can see that here you have a lot of colliders you could use. But in this case, I'm just going to add a circle collider. So now let's try again, and I'm going to show you something that here, as you can see, if we collide with the player, its rotation is changed, but as you can see, some collision is now being detected. In order to avoid our player from being rotated in that very strange way, in our rigid body settings constraints, we are going to freeze the rotation. So now when we play, as you can see, no rotation or weird things happening. I'm going to create another script inside of our script folder, create C#, and for example I'm going to call it coin collision detector, which is basically going to detect the collision of the coin. I'm going to assign it here also. You can draw it also here inside the inspector or also inside the game object. As you can see, it's the same thing. Okay, and I'm going to open this script. In order to detect collisions between 2 game objects, you are going to call the function on collision enter 2D. You have here a summary, but I believe that with the method name you have more than enough in order to understand it. Also, it's important here to consider that we have here a parameter that is actually the body colliding with it. So for example, we could print here print other, which is the collider, dot game object dot name. So this will print the game object name with which the coin is colliding with. So this means that for example here I'm going to open the console, and if our player collides with the coin, you can see player, because the coin is colliding with the player and the game object name of the player is player. But for example we could here modify it to, I don't know, hello, and if we play again, you're going to see hello is printed. But no, because the changes weren't saved because I made them in play mode. So here hello again, and I'm going to play this thing again, and as you can see, hello, hello, hello. Having this information, something very useful. Well, firstly, let's put here player. In a more complex game, or literally in any other type of game, probably you'll have a lot of collisions. So how to differentiate the different collision and the different objects is very important. So how to differentiate game object collisions? By using tags. So you will select the game object of the player, and here in the tag you have here some default tags that Unity create, for example respawn, finish, main camera. But here we have player. For example, if you want to add another tag with an other name, you can click here where it says add tag, and here you could add other tag. In this case, with the tag player, we are going to be fine. So here in the collision, we are going to detect that if our collider and our game object dot compare tag, it means that if our tag is player, so we are colliding with the player, in this case we are going to destroy this punto game object. So if the coin collides with a player, with a game object with a tag player, it's going to destroy itself, which means the coin with which the player has collided. If we try this out, when we collide with a coin, it's destroyed. But look carefully, when the player collides with the coin, you can see that in a way the coin stops the player from moving. So watch quickly. Okay, as you can see, it stops the player movement just for a couple of seconds. So to fix this, we are going to use other method called on trigger enter 2D. I'm going to delete this summary and I'm going to cut and paste the code we've created before into this other function. And then here in the coin circle collider, I'm going to turn on is trigger. So now when I play, you can see that no movement is stopped. The next thing we can do, we only have here one coin. So if you want to add some other coins, you can select the coin game object, click Ctrl D, or also you can right click it, and here you have a button called duplicate, and you can duplicate as much coins as you want. If you want to move the coins, you can make this thing happen from the transform, as you can see. But a more common way of doing this is to select the game object and use the move tool, which can be used from here, or you have the shortcut, which is W, and you can move this coin around. I'm going to create, for example, 5 coins in a random position. So now I have a total of 5 coins I can collect, and each will be destroyed when I collide with them. So with this very simple example, you should be able to understand the basic concepts of game development, and this player movement script probably you are going to use it in a lot of 2D games. You have also learned about collisions, which also are used in every single game. And one last thing we could modify in our project would be changing the background color of the camera. So just select the main camera, and in the background you can change the color to whatever you like. For example, I'm going to select here a purple and here you have the color. So as I was saying before, you have learned the very basic concepts of game development. Of course, as this is maybe your first, your second, or your third tutorial of game development, maybe some things aren't as clear as they should. So if you have some problems understanding the code, the Unity interface, or literally anything, I encourage you to post a comment down below, and I'm going to be replying as soon as I can. Or you can contact me via Discord, the link is in the description below. Also, I recommend you to check the other videos in the channel, because I have some other Unity tutorials that may be useful for you. And also keep researching about the things on the code that you haven't understood. For example, about the delta time, there is a lot of information about that is very important. About the type of data, the returned values, there's a lot of things you can research based on this video and this very simple code. But I hope overall this tutorial was very helpful, and if it was, please subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.